The story of how Ray came to Father Nathan Castle is truly remarkable, and it's one of the best and most fascinating stories that I have heard. His ability to describe what happens as souls move through the afterlife is just remarkable. In this interview, I think there's three really distinctive things to look for. First is Ray's story. Of course, it's right at the beginning and it's just great. The second is Father Castle's description of the interrupted death experience and how he helps people and how we can help people who we might think will be stuck in the afterlife. And third, how he pushes souls to help them change in the afterlife in a way that makes them feel safe and valued. Okay, here is Father Castle's bio. Father Nathan Castle, OP, has helped more than 500 stuck and not so stuck souls who died suddenly and traumatically to adjust to the afterlife. Victims of fires, automobile accidents, shootings, stabbings, drownings, and suicides come to him in his dreams, seeking to help resolve their interrupted death experiences. Father Nathan believes that providing such help is something the Holy Spirit has given him and his prayer partners to do. He's written 3 books, the most recent of which is Afterlife, Interrupted, Book 3. Please let me explain. A perfect segue into our interview with Father Nathan Castle. Here we go. Father Nathan, I have been so looking forward to having you on our show. Welcome to the Afterlife Files.
Well, here we are. Great to be here.
So, we have, or you have, a really interesting story about how you got into this and what interrupted death means. Would you kind of give us a little background on yourself so everybody knows kind of what your lens is on the world?
Sure. Well, the specific work that I do that I've described in this Afterlife Interrupted series, these 3 books, um, involves a phenomenon that started in my life about 27 years ago, where during the night I would receive contact through a dream, not my own psychobabble, someone else moving into my consciousness to show me how they died in a sudden and violent way. Um, I grew up as a little Catholic boy in Southeast Texas, being trained not just in rules about an organized religion, but in spirit. That I'm a spirit being living on the earth for a time. I will eventually die and live on in another form. Uh, One of the things that we were taught is that we could communicate with our heaven family before sleep. So when I was 3 or 4 years old, my mom was teaching me how to talk to my heaven family, and uh, part of what I learned as time went on was that when people die, it seemed like they went to one of 3 places, like Mexico, the U.S., or Canada. That there were these like afterlife city states or nations where you were either good or bad or kind of in between. And it seemed to me that most people weren't terrible and most people weren't perfect, that the most populated one must be the one in the middle, which was I was told was purgatory. And we were told that it wasn't as good as heaven, but people uh, there would eventually get to heaven, but we could help them with our prayers. So I thought of it as like showing up at the bank and having those velvet ropes that go back and forth, or maybe like at an amusement park. It's annoying, but if you just stay in line and move patiently, you'll get to the front. Well, I just thought of myself as this little prayer guy that could say, "Would you like me to bring you up to the front?"
I
With
love it.
we were taught that our prayers would cut down the time that people needed to stay in purgatory. And So I thought, well, why wouldn't I do that? Both of my dad's siblings were Dominican nuns. I belong to that same order now that they did all those years ago. They were both first grade teachers, so they were very skilled in teaching little kids. And they made a lot of things make sense to me. So um, they also taught me, we lived in a town that was half Baptist and half Catholic. And in those early days of the 60s, the relations between the two groups were unpleasant. And um, and they kind of traded barbs with each other. But I learned that only the Catholics understood there was a purgatory, and the Baptists didn't believe there was one, so they didn't pray for their people after they died. So I thought, well, that just doesn't sound fair at all. You belong to the wrong religion, and so you have to stay longer. That doesn't seem fair. So once I learned how to read enough to watch the obituaries. We got newspapers in the morning and the evening, so twice a day. And each newspaper had a full page of photographs of people who had died recently. And once I knew how to read enough to figure out what was going on, all the way at the bottom, it would say what church their services were going to be in. And in those days, nobody had a funeral at the beach or the lake or anything. Even if you didn't go to church, your funeral was from a church. So if they went to any church besides a Catholic one, I would say I'll pray for that one. And I would take the newspaper to bed with me and fall asleep praying for people to get quick through the line. That was my practice.
I love it that you were taking care of the Baptists. Your aunts really taught you well.
My mom did too. She was a very devout person, and she would say, "Get your pajamas on and brush your teeth. I'll be in to help you with your prayers." And when I was really small, it was a repeat after me formula of blessing different people. But as I was able to begin to understand a little bit more, that became a practice for me. Every night I would go to sleep, and then we there's a do you know the word compline? Have you ever heard that word?
I don't know that word.
Compline. It's the last prayer of the day in a monastery, and my order is semi-monastic, so I've lived in a monastic setting and was taught Compline. It's the last prayer of the day in a monastery, and it's like a lullaby for monks. It's how to, if you're going to pray without ceasing, as St. Paul says, how do you pray while you're unconscious? Well, you set your intention before you go unconscious. So you say to the Lord before going to sleep, I would like you to bless my consciousness during the night and use it in any way you would like to, and then help me receive it back in the morning. So that was already familiar to me because I had been taught something similar when I was tiny. So then this phenomena started when I was ordained a priest at 29 years old, and at about 42 or 3, that's when this particular phenomenon of souls that died violently and suddenly began showing up about once a week.
This is after you were 29 years old, sometime after that.
Yeah, I was ordained at 29, and so I had already been a priest maybe about a dozen years. So somewhere in my early 40s, I think, when this first occurred. And the first dream was it's outlined in a lot of detail in my first Afterlife Interrupted book. So I'll try to just hit it lightly, that story. But it was I saw a young man about 20 years old sitting on the radiator of an old car from the late 50s, the kind with fins and lots of chrome.
Yep.
And he caught fire. He wasn't in a crash. And I don't know why I knew that, but I did. And he caught fire and was screaming, not just because he was in pain and agony, but because he was angry at somebody. And I understood all of that in the dream. That was all communicated. And I woke up. So it reminded me of being paged because I don't know, your younger viewers might not know what a pager is. But you know those things when you go to the restaurant and your table's not ready and they hand you this thing that lights up and buzzes. It's a little like that. It tells you, it signals you that pay attention. That it used to be that if you lived in a town where there were several priests, like Tucson, you had to take a turn being the person on call for a hospital emergency during the night. So Tuesday night be your night to have the pager on the nightstand. And if it went off, you had to go from asleep to alert very quickly to get data points. You needed to know what floor and what room, and then who you're talking to at the nurse station, next of kin, or who, all those things. So
Right.
it felt like that. I was called in the night because I was needed.
And what did this young man say what he needed, or you just
Yes, he
knew he
did.
needed help?
Well, I prayed right away and said, "My name's Nathan. I don't know what you need, but we'll figure this out together. But right now, I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to go back to sleep. And in the morning, we'll figure this out. So stay tuned." And I was on a retreat that I was leading it, but there were about 20 people. I was then at the university at Arizona State University as the director of Catholic Campus Ministry, and I was with about 20 adults on a retreat that we had just begun. I don't know if your audience is familiar with weekend retreats, but you're hauling your stuff in on a Friday night and finding your cabin or whatever, and maybe there's some little session, and then everybody goes to bed, and you hit it hard in the morning on Saturday. Well, on retreat, there's almost always people that are the early risers that exercise or that want the first drop of coffee. And I watch the exercisers go do that while I have the coffee. But I knew I had a friend that was on the retreat who I knew had a lot of spiritual gifts. She and I had been prayer partners for a couple of years, maybe by that time. So I went to her and said, "Something happened in the night that's spiritual. Would you pray with me and let's see if we're told what this is?" So we went aside and we went into quiet prayer. We weren't in prayer more than 3 minutes, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. And she said, "Whoever this man is, he really wants to talk to you. Would it be okay if I allow him to?" And I knew she had that gift. And I
Oh,
knew that I had it too, the gift of what I call prophetic speech. In a lot of the circles that you and I travel in, that would probably be most best known as channeling.
yep.
In the Catholic Church, that's a radioactive word, so I avoid its use because it just causes upset. I believe the Jewish Old Testament prophets, if you go to Christian worship where there's an Old Testament reading, very often the first reading is from a prophet. And the prophet Isaiah there might be a narrative voice that says the prophet Isaiah went from this town to that. Then he got to the place he was going and he said, "Hi, Scott, I'm Isaiah." So now you have to inflect your voice twice. You were a narrator. Now you're the prophet Isaiah using his own voice. And before long, the prophet Isaiah says something like, "Thus saith the Lord, stop oppressing the poor." So it's the voice of God. So that same reader needs to be able to inflect in three different ways. So the prophetic speech is allowing another to borrow your voice for a godly purpose. And I believed that that was what this was. So I said, we've protected ourselves with the angels and saints before we went. I don't like do Ouija boards or just, contact anyone who'll rattle the teacups. I want to talk to someone specific and not just any old spirit. And I advise that. I don't think just because a person is in spirit doesn't mean that they have good intentions. There are people here who don't, and I don't believe that that automatically changes. Anyway, we went into prayer, and she said, "I said, sure, go ahead." And out of her voice came a man who said, "Who the hell does he think he is, taking me just when my life was getting good?"
Wow, that's quite an accent.
I'm from Texas. I can put it on if I need to. He was from rural Georgia, and we introduced ourselves and said, "Well, what is it? How can we help you?" Just like you're in a store. The clerk says, "How can I help you? How can we help you?" My wife. Um, uh, I've been watching her for 40 years now. She's got cancer and she's dying, and I want to greet her when she passes, but I can't the way I am. And I said, "Oh, okay. Now we have a specific goal in mind. We need to help you change in some way from how you are to a different way so that you can greet your wife. Is that correct? So that's what our job was, and we got to work. It took us 3 tries, I think, or 3 sessions over about a 3-week period. I told him, I said, remember, he died in 1960. He said, I was 4 years old in 1960. And I said, what have you been doing since? And he said, nothing much. And I said, well, and now you want to be in a hurry. Your, your cancer's got its own schedule and it's not going to wait on you. So if you want to move and you want us to help you move, we're going to have to get you up and moving quickly, and you're probably not going to like it because in general, people don't like to change. And but so anytime you're ready, anytime we press harder than you want to be pressed, you just say so. You're the boss, but we'll help as we can. So we did that over a few weeks. It's the only one that ever took more than 1 session, just that very first one out of about 600. But we helped him get what he wanted. He wanted to greet his wife, and he had to do a little. He was very angry, and he had isolated in the afterlife because he was so angry. That's an option for us if we want it to be.
And so to get him out of that anger and get him into a better place, you and your spiritual
I
friend,
call her a prayer
uh,
partner.
a prayer partner, thank you for that word. Um, what kinds of things would you have to do to move this guy along so quickly?
Well, first we got acquainted as helpers, or kind of
Sure. Yeah,
friends,
that
or
makes sense.
give us a little background. He explained that uh, they had gotten pregnant their senior year of high school. They married, and the baby was about a year and a half old. They were living in a rented house with a detached garage where he and his best friend started a small business repairing cars. And their custom was to invite the friend over for Sunday dinner. So it would be the two adults, the baby, and the friend at Sunday dinner. Well, it turned out that they'd been drinking, and the friend said something that Ray, this guy, felt was insulting or off color to his
Oh,
wife, and they took it outside, and they went over to the shop, and he was wearing greasy clothes. He remembered that he'd been working. And he sat on the radiator of the car and he caught fire, and he still doesn't know why. He just did. And he died. And but I said, well, how did you know there was a God at all? Because he was mad at God. And well, first I said, have you been with anybody at all? And he said, well, there's just this guy that sits over in the corner, but he never says anything.
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, in the Catholic world, yesterday was the Feast of the Guardian Angels. Uh, they get called lots of things, spirit guides, light beings, whatever. The nomenclature in the Catholic Church is guardian angel. And his angel was with him, but he understood that the guy wanted to be left as alone as it's possible to be. I don't believe the universe allows that utterly. I believe that it's more of a network, and you can't actually take yourself out of it utterly. But you're allowed to do the closest approximation to that if that's your choice. So he had done that. Well, he said he learned about God from his mother, who used to make him kneel next to the bed to pray, and she would beat him while he prayed.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful? I said, well, why in the world did she do that? I don't know. She just did. I said, well, okay. And how did you get this idea people, that God takes people? That's why he was mad at God, because who the hell does he think he has taken me just when my life was getting good? So his death by fire was God's doing. Well, who would want to be with that being that burned you to death? So
Hmm.
it had its own kind of internal reason. And I said, well, I've known God all my life. Who taught you that? He said, Brother James. And I said, well, who was he? Well, he was my pastor. And I said, well, did you know I'm a pastor too? And I'm a Catholic priest. And he said, oh, shit. Uh, and I said, well, that's what you got. And uh, and I've known God all my life, and I don't believe that God burns people to death. just hold this thought that the mother who beat you might have been doing the best she knew how to teach you about God. But would you have beaten your child if you'd gotten to live longer? He was a year and a half old when you died, but had you been there longer, would you have beat your son while he said his prayers? He said, of course not. And I said, well, just hold out the thought that maybe you got just a little twisted idea about what God is and how God acts from the mom that beat you. He didn't like that because people don't like having their mind changed, even if it's for their good. So
Yep.
anyway, it was kind of like that. It was just getting him to move along. I said, we're going to need to get you moving unless your wife shows up in this little cave you've created. Uh, you're the one that's going to have to move out toward her, don't you think? And he said, yeah, I suppose. I said, well, then let's get you moving. I thought about his mom. And I said, let's not get the mom involved.
Not
Let's
yet.
leave it off to the side. What about your dad? Well, I hardly even knew him. He died when I was 10. I was kind of afraid of him. He died in the war. And I said, Vietnam? No, Korea. Duh. And it was 1960. I said, well, there's a counseling technique. When a counselee goes low, you go high. You know, see if you can get them to think something positive. Well, did you and your dad ever have a good time together just as a father and a son? He thought for a minute and he said, well, one time we went and looked at cars. I said, well, I'm not sure how this works, but what if we try this? What if we asked him to come and not come too close? Maybe you draw sort of a line where he could come this close and no further until you get a good look at him. And you decide whether or not it's safe for you to let him take you for a walk, get you up and moving a little bit. How about that? Could you do that? And he said, yeah, I could do that. So I said, okay, well, we're going to just ask God to send your dad if he's available. So I didn't make a great big deal out of it. I just said, God, Ray would like to see his dad, please. Would that be possible? And within 10 seconds, he said, look there. And I said, I can't see what you're seeing. You're going to have to describe it to us, my dad. And I said, well, do you think you're being tricked?
Oh,
Are you afraid?
that's a good. Yeah. Okay.
Are you being tricked? Or do you think it's really him? And he said, yeah, I think it is. And I said, well, pay attention to where you are so that you can get back here because you're safe where you are. If at any minute you feel like you're unsafe, make sure you can get back to where it's safe. I was thinking how you have to be careful when you go to a stadium or a mall to make sure you know where you park the car, you know, level
Yep.
3, purple, uh,
Giraffe. Yeah. Whatever.
whatever it is. And so I said, just make sure you know how to get back here just in case you feel the need. And we left it at that. We talked to him again in about a week. We were both busy people. And we weren't going to put him off for long because of the cancer of his wife, but there was a little bit of passage of time. We got back together a second time, and I said, you know what? Well, we asked how it went, and he said, we went and looked at cars, and I said, how'd that work? He died in the early 50s. You died in 1960, and now it's 1997 or whatever it was. And I said, did you have to time travel? And he said, no, we just went and looked at the new ones. So I think somewhere on Earth at the time, these two spectral father-son team got together on a car lot, just as a guy thing, to have an excuse to be together and look at cars. So I
I
said,
think that,
okay, well,
yeah, that's
you're
wonderful that they chose an activity. I mean, he wound up loving cars and obviously created a mechanic shop because that was,
you do a
something
lot
that
of
he
work.
really resonated with.
You do a lot of work in this realm. Don't you think imagination is really, really important?
Oh, it's hugely important.
Yeah.
It is the key that opens up everything.
Me too. I'm trained in Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, and they both taught that nothing can come to be actually until it first existed in imagination.
I love that quote.
Yeah, the idea is, well, you're talking into a microphone. You didn't make that microphone. You probably bought it, but somebody had to first imagine it and its component parts and how they would be put together, how they'd be fabricated, all of that. All of that had to exist in a kind of blueprint before it could become real. And everything operates that way. Everything, I think. Um,
Everything.
Yeah, and so I work with that in counseling is let's imagine a different circumstance than the one you're in, and let's see if we can't find steps that get us from where you are to where you'd like to be. So we were just doing that. It's pretty simple. So anyway, I told him, now that you can move, that's a real good thing. But I think I know what the problem is, and I don't think you're going to like it. What? And I said, well, every time you talk about your wife, you sound like a caveman. You sound like you own the exclusive rights to her because you were married to her for a year and a half. Now you're the only dead husband, and you're the only one with whom she had a child because even though she married to her lawyer and moved to South Carolina, where she was dying, but said, you're really important, but you're not the whole show. I think this woman is in her 60s now. You loved her, but you're probably not the only person that would like to greet her when she comes. Could you just get yourself ready to be in maybe a small select group and just be a gentleman about it? He didn't.
Wise. I love that.
Doesn't that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. And think how many people are in that situation anyway, where spouses have died, or somebody, like in my case, my girlfriend, died in a car accident. I would like to see her too, but I have the love of my life here that I'm married to, so you know
And
it
you don't
it
need to
gets being
bulldoze your way to the
confusing.
head of the line. That's not the way that we love. We just I just said, I think if you would just be a gentleman about it, you'd find that you're welcome and it would work. Why don't you try that? So we left it at that. And then the last time that we met up with him, well, it turned it out to be the second to the last, but we said, hey, Ray, how's it going? And he said, big news, my wife passed. And I said, oh, well, tell us all about that. And
Yeah.
he said, well, it was kind of like you said, there weren't very many of us because there shouldn't be when a person just died. But there was a small group of us, and we were happy to see her, and she was happy to see us. And he said, you would have been proud of me. I was the perfect gentleman. And I said, well, I knew you had it in it all along. You just had to calm down and figure some things out. So I said, I think our work here is done. We've helped you do the thing that you set out to do, and I'm sure you've got other places to go and people to see now that you can move around in the afterlife. And we have other work to do too. So I guess we're saying goodbye, don't you think? And he said, yes, sir, I think so. And I said, well, you know what? Now I know two things about you. I know that you know how to watch people for a long time because you watched your wife for 40 years. And I know that you know how to greet her because you just proved it. Would you mind watching me between now and the time that I die? And would you come to greet me when I
Oh.
pass? And he said, why, sir, I'd be most honored. Just look for the perfect gentleman. So he's the first of all these stories, and he's in book one, and I call him Ray, the perfect gentleman. And we only tell these people's stories out loud in a book if we go back to them one last time to get their permission.
Oh,
I
sure.
don't, I
That's
really don't.
that's also respectful. Yeah.
It is, and my tradition there, it frowns on easy discourse with those who have died. Um, and so we're not just trying to get tomorrow's lottery numbers or poking around just out of curiosity, but it seemed like a respectful thing to do before telling a story to say, may we please tell it out loud. So it's a yes or no question. So it could have been a very short conversation. May we use your story? Yes, period. We're done. But instead, he told us that after he realized that he did know how to greet somebody when they passed, he said, I wanted to know more about that. And then he talked about schooling in rural Georgia in the 50s. And he said, I was never very interested in what they were trying to teach me. I didn't like school and school didn't like me. He said, but now I know there's something I want to know more about, and they have a school for that. So I'm going to the school where I can learn about how to be a greeter. He
Oh,
said.
wow.
So
Because it also strikes me that Ray, when he met his wife probably actually showed him how to move further into the light, and
maybe that's the kind of follow-up that we don't do.
yeah, I
Unless he had volunteered that, I just feel like I will leave that for my own afterlife. And besides, people keep coming at the rate of about once a week. I've got another person to help. My prayer partners aren't busy. So I don't really think it's our job to chase after people and get a lot of curious questions answered. We just kind of, I learned that there's a therapeutic level for people that need it, like people that died in a fire. Uh, you know how you go to a funeral and people will sometimes say things like, now daddy's up there on the first tee in heaven,
Yeah.
you know, mom is with her bridge club or something like that. Well, maybe if you just got shot and murdered, maybe you're not ready for bridge or golf just this minute. Maybe there's a need of some sort of afterlife gradient where you calm down or heal or understand things. And then maybe there's a readiness for bridge and golf and everything else. So we've figured out we're kind of the discharge staff at this medical level, this healing level. We don't really do the hard work. Um, we don't really do the counseling like we did with Ray. That was just the first time. It's already been done by others. And we're like the social worker near the door that helps you gather your things and figure out your plan for moving along. So
I,
that's what we do.
I love that. And you're absolutely right. When my father passed, I went and checked in on him and just see how he was doing. And he died when he was 94. So all his contemporaries had preceded him.
Uh-huh.
And we had a place arranged to meet. And there he was playing cards, talking smack with his old buddies.
Yeah.
And it was profoundly joyous. And I could see where this work would be really rewarding in helping people, kind of like, wow, I can move on. This is wonderful. My dream is now fulfilled. Something on that order.
Yes, the reason I use the word interrupted, it and in the middle of it, it has the root word from rupture, to be torn from. And a lot of people leave here feeling torn from what what their life was moments before the accident or the whatever it is that took their life suddenly. And so some of them feel so torn that they really do need to have an opportunity to restore, renew, regather something. They might have lots of different ways of thinking about it, but I've seen it. There's lots of references to something like a spa, like a Betty Ford clinic that only wealthy people could afford to go to. That's fully equipped, and you don't have to. You're not hurried because of the insurance or anything like that. People just have everything they need, and what I call the Holy Spirit knows what you need. So nobody hands you a pill and says, take this for 2 weeks and let's see if it works. They don't they don't need to do that. They 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 know what's needed, and then it's just a matter of propriety and pace. It's
Yep.
your life, and so it's not up to other people to tell you, to get in line and hurry up. You do what you need to do at the pace you need to do it, and then we're there when they're ready to move along, and we help them do that.
So you have now written your third book. It's
That's right.
called Afterlife Interrupted Book Three. Please let me explain.
Yeah.
That is a great title. It's got me all interested. What is the Please Let Me Explain all about?
Well, between the first meeting with the person and helping them do the crossing that we assist with, and then if we decide that this is a good story to include in a potential new book, we go back with it and ask permission. So and when we do that, I use an app on my phone that just records the session. When the session's over, I hit transcribe, and within an AI turns it into a Word document in about 2 minutes time.
Isn't that
So
sweet?
yeah, it is. And so I have, and it's inexpensive. I have a full text of what went on. I clean it up for ums and ahs that make it difficult to read. I do a very light edit just to give the potential hearer of the story find a fly on the wall experience of it. What would have been like to have been there? So But in
It's
the
all,
courts,
yeah, it's also respectful just because spoken language is so different than written language. It kind of need to clean it up so that it's easily understood.
I'm co-conscious with them the whole time too, so I'm not entranced. So
Got it.
they're using my consciousness, and so I have my own little foibles. I start a lot of sentences with so, and, or but, which in my childhood would have been a red X. You can't start a sentence with a preposition, but in my common speech, I do it a lot. And people using my voice seem to do that too. So I get rid of some of that just because it's annoying. And then there's a surprising number of times when especially extroverts change their thinking in mid-sentence.
Yeah.
They don't finish the thought that they were on their way to expressing before they started another one. So some of that just needs to be cleaned up to make it not so annoying to listen to. So anyway, I do that. And then some of the people, when they between the first story and the second one, they've grown in self-knowledge because of the counseling that they've been through in the afterlife. So they can describe what their circumstance was at the time of their violent death, how they reacted to it, the process that they've been through with a helper team, their guardian angel, and other helpers, other healers. Uh, they describe the process they've moved through that's making it now possible for them to elevate. They often talk about it in terms of something spatial that involves upward movement. I can now go on to the next level.
Hmm.
They can come back to the one that they're already on to visit, but new realms open above them. And those aren't necessarily limitless because they're not completely whole yet. They just got healthy enough that they don't need this clinic. And now they can go on to something better. And there might be something better after that, but we're not involved in that. We keep our little spot.
So I imagine out of all these stories, you've got a favorite one besides Ray. Uh, kind of tell us something that
Well, there's
would
one that's
pique our
coming to mind
interest.
right now that is in book three, and we thought her story was so explanatory. This woman is a little different, less than 10%, but somewhere 8 to 10% of the ones we help didn't die violently, but they suffered a trauma from which they never recovered, and they carried it to their grave. Um, you must know at least one person right now who is walking wounded and uh, might not get over whatever happened between now and their death. I think most of us probably know such a person, or might have even felt like we were that person. There might have been a wound that just didn't seem healable. Anyway, in her case, her name is Sylvia. She was about 28 years old in the early years of a marriage, and she and her husband had a 2-year-old daughter. The husband and the daughter went on an errand and were killed in an automobile accident.
Oh, yeah.
So her life went from what she thought was all set, the love of her life and the beginning of a family, and it all collapsed in an instant. And in
Been
the
there.
dream, she showed me getting up in the night to go to use the restroom, and there was a record on a turntable playing um, Unforgettable. The what's the woman? The Nat King Cole, Natalie Cole, Nat King Cole's daughter.
Yep. That's a
Um,
beautiful song.
it's a beautiful song. It's haunting, and it's a love song, but it's like I wish I could get you off my mind, but I can't. It had a mournful quality to it, and it was on a turntable because the turntable was suggesting in dream language that it won't stop, that it goes round and round and round. Um, and I woke up. Well, when we went into prayer, we learned the detail that, but it turned out that she decided that because she was this widow, this young widow with this awful, sad story, that no one would want to be around her.
Oh,
She decided that for everybody in her life.
Wow. Okay.
She worked in something like accounting or insurance or something like that, but she refused to go out after work with friends. Um, she wouldn't have anyone to her home because she said, "Why would anyone want to come to this home? It's like a mausoleum." And so she just decided that she was this figure that reminded people of tragic death, and there was nothing to be done about it. Um, so she had a great sense of humor about it. I love that about a lot of these people, that they can laugh about the way they died, even though it was in a fire or whatever it was. They she just said, I started watching television. I hated television. She called it the boob tube. But she
Yep.
said the house was just so quiet. I had to have some sound in it, or all I'd hear was the air conditioning going on and off or the roof creaking. And she said, I started watching TV, and in order to justify the time I spent in front of the TV, she went to a craft store and took up needlepoint. She said they in craft stores they have these silly little kits that where you can needlepoint a sailboat. And
Sure.
I would do that while I watched TV because I knew somebody that had a sailboat. And then if anybody said to me, "What's new with you, Sylvia?" she'd say, "Oh, I've taken up needlepoint." Like well, that's a reason for living. And anyway, she got a diagnosis of ovarian cancer. And she said, I contained myself and I didn't run out screaming, "Good news, I've got ovarian cancer," but I wanted to. I thought, here's my ticket. I don't have to live a long life here. I can die young. Um, and she said, she got an insurance settlement. She paid off the house. She was well set financially. She said, once I understood that I had this stage 4 cancer, she said, I got the people that I would need to be, have an organized exit. And she said, all of that worked the way it should. But um, she said, I didn't know what it would be like, but I died and I got here on the other side and they said, well, we're going to help you. We're happy that you're here. Um, but you disengaged from your life quite some time ago, and you've got to get kind of use those muscles again. They've atrophied. You you need to we need to help you re-engage. And once you get strong enough, we'll see if you'd like to meet up with your husband and your daughter. We'll help that happen. So she went through a process to do that. And then at the very end, she compared the when she could see them, she said, "Do you know those old neon signs from the 50s? Maybe a motel sign with a cowboy on the back of a horse, and the
Sure.
neon sign would, at the beginning, it would be level to the ground, and then it would rear up, and the guy would take his hat off." He said, "They're doing something like that. They're showing me one way of being, and then they're showing me a second way of being, and then they're going back to the other one. They're showing me what they look like now." And she said, my husband looks like a middle-aged man who's very handsome. And my
Hmm.
daughter looks to be about 18. But then they're turning back to what they looked like the day they left the house. And then they're going back the other way. And they're letting me know that if I need them to, they'll meet me all the way back where we were that day when they left. But they really want me to catch up. They'd really rather I join them where they are, if I am willing to. So that was the way she thought of it. A neon sign that's goes back and forth.
I
So
think
I
that's
just thought,
interesting that time is so malleable on the other side that it can be at whatever time is needed in order for the healing to take place.
yes, and very often people have been told they're not made to feel stupid, that it's more of a Montessori school than a traditional school where you have to sit still and keep up with the class, that you go at the pace that you choose. There's one woman that there was again another one of these ones that didn't die of a trauma, but her husband dropped dead in front of her. Her name's Wilhelmina, and she felt like her whole world died when her husband died, and she dissociated.
Yep.
She went one step away from herself and she started thinking, what should a woman do when her husband dies suddenly? She probably ought to go in his closet and get the clothes he'll be laid out in. That woman probably ought to write an obituary. That woman ought to call his workplace. Uh, And so she lived the rest of her life one step removed from her center of being because it
Wow.
hurt too much to be there. And she said, I realized that over time they showed me here that my children and my grandchildren only got to know this weird, crabby version of me because it was all I could give them. And she ended up in a nursing home, and she said, I I made a mess. I made a fuss if they put talkative people in my room or women that got visitors. I wanted to be with the sickest ones that laid there in a coma and that nobody visited. And she died that way. And then they made her see on the other side, well, you've gotten used to a lot of isolation and living outside of yourself, but that doesn't mean you have to stay that way. And it's up to you. But if you really want to live your life again, we'll help you get back on the horse. We'll help you. And she got frustrated with herself that she said, I wasn't always so slow. It depended on the subject. She was thinking of being a little girl in school. She said it depended on the subject. I could be smart and I could go fast. She got frustrated with her own self, and they brought her people from her childhood, which I see often. For a lot of people, childhood was a time when things were less complicated. If you had an orderly home, uh, uh, where you were well cared for, and people kept coming around to her and visiting, and they would say things like, after we leave here, we're going to go out for lunch. Maybe one of these days you'll go with us. And they kind of tried to entice her to move along. And eventually she did that, and she reunited with her husband.
Yeah.
He showed up as a 16-year-old on their first date.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we all know somebody who's, crabby Aunt Maple or whatever, where they're slightly disassociated. And when they pass, how can we as mere mortals help their transition and help them move along? Because, I'm pretty sure that they're going to need it.
That's a great question. And it was what I was doing as that little kid that was praying with the obituaries. Um, you know how we refer to money as currency from the
Hmm.
word current? Uh, current moves through a canal, channel, uh, and it involves something uh, that adds value or creates energetic possibility. My dad used to send me money in college by putting money in my checking account. He'd say on the phone, "Son, do you need anything?" And I'd say, "Well, yeah, I'm a little short. I could use some help." And money would just show up in my checking account. And he never asked what I spent it on because he believed he raised a trustworthy son. Um, so when he died, I used to send him money. I still do. I did. He died in 1997, so it's been a long while. But uh, I think of a prayer as just a form of love, and it's love moving from your heart to another by intention.
Yep.
And so you don't need to know what they're going to do with it. It's sort of like a gift card. When you give a gift card at Christmas or a birthday, you don't necessarily expect the person to write you back and tell you what they spent that $25 on. You might have forgot you gave it to them. Uh, you just offer them love and say, I want you to have. I think love is just this energetic force that can be used to do just about everything. It empowers. So I just would send them love in a prayer and say, this is me, and I'm sending you love. I hope this helps you do whatever you're most interested in doing next.
I love that. And probably like you, I think that love is the strongest force that's in the universe. There's
Me too.
it's it's just remarkable what can be done with that energy and that sense of gratitude that comes with it.
I've been on university campuses for 50 years now.
Yep.
I'm living on one right now, the University of Arizona, and there's all these departments all over the place with big, tall buildings dedicated to geology or sociology. But I haven't run across a loveology department anywhere.
Oh, how sad.
Why isn't there that? Why isn't there a PhD in love? It's probably because it's interdisciplinary to begin with, and it's all over the place. But I don't think there's anything more important, and I don't know anybody would argue that love isn't important.
And I think it's the root of our calling to whatever we find in our occupation and in our life.
I do too, and I've seen it through the prism of all these different people that we've helped along the way, that the people that loved them the most, even if it was in a sort of passing way. Your fourth grade teacher, they'll show up because they loved you purely and you received it. And so sometimes, even for very wounded souls, there's somebody that's a great icon of love. And that
Yep.
person will show up even if they were, a bit character in the play of your life. Um, they show up because they are nothing but love and they can help you reopen your heart.
We're getting kind of down here to the end. So, is there any kind of last thought you'd like to leave us with in how we can um, live our life well with the information that you're giving us?
The essence of it for me is I'm a Catholic Christian and a priest. We have a phrase called the Easter Proclamation. That's one sentence. It's essentially an Easter card. He is risen, or Jesus is risen from the dead. I believe he was not a one-off, a one in a million. I believe he's the template showing us what we are, and that all of us survive our death. And it doesn't matter what religion you belong to, if any, that it belongs to your ontic nature to be a person who survives your death. And that can change everything, especially for people who might be getting older and declining and might maybe feel their best years are behind them. No, they're not, because you're eternal. You might pass through some decrepitude between here and the grave, but that doesn't have to define you. You can be or do whatever you want, within the limits that you have to work with. But anyway, a sense of huge possibility, and that's really, really important to me.
And I love the fact that there are those on the other side who will greet us where we are and help us to realize this potential, this sense of possibility of opportunity that exists once we lose this physical body.
And they can help even between now and then.
Amen.
I start the day talking to my guardian angel and to some of my saint friends and my parents and whatnot, and I ask them to come and be with me. Um, my grandmother was a mystic who lived next door, and she thought of this Holy Spirit as a library, that all you ever needed to do was ask for the knowledge that you didn't have, and it would be downloaded. Download would have been a word that my grandmother would have used, but she said, it's all there for you. All you need to do is ask for it and receive it.
Wise woman.
Yeah.
I hope
Yeah.
she's still around and giving you insight.
She shows up once in a while. It's funny. My dad and one of my aunts show up more. My mom shows up a little bit, but she's very quiet. She always was. She doesn't really want to talk. But anyway, there's lots of different helpers that will come in and aid you if you ask them to.
And I think that's a lovely spot to end our conversation. The idea of being willing to ask for help, ask for knowledge,
Of course.
and to be open to receive, whatever it is guidance is trying to send our way.
Absolutely. One thing I would add right as we're ending is that if people want to be in touch with me after having seen or heard this podcast, I ask if they would please read one of the books first, because we would have a richer exchange if they, had a little more knowledge about what my partners and I do than I was able to tell in a
So,
hurry on a podcast.
so where can people find out more about you so that they can get a hold of that book
Yeah,
and
well,
move
my
on?
website is nathan-castle.com, nathan-castle.com. And on there's a contact form. I like for people to be able to at least tell me what time zone they live in. And if they offer a phone number, I prefer to text and maybe arrange a quick phone call, if that can work. Sometimes for overseas people, I'll do a Zoom. Um, But and then I'm a little behind on that right now. I've had a little back trouble, and so I don't know if anybody out there has back trouble, but everything slows down when you have to figure out how to put your socks on without bending. I've been doing a little bit of that of late, so I'm a little bit behind, but I'll catch up.
As they say, it's a pain.
It is, and they right in the rear. Yeah, that's where mine is, right in the lower back. But anyway, onward and upward.
Thank you, Father Nathan Castle. This has been terrific. And for those of you who are watching this, please stick around. I've got a really interesting insight that I want to share with you. So we'll see you on the flip side.
I find it really interesting, this whole language of culture and how people can accept things using one word and not using a different word. His example was prophetic speech, how the Catholic Church says that's okay, but those of us that are kind of in the more academic everyday culture would say channeling's not okay, prophetic speech is. So, let's not be distracted by words. Let's really pay attention to what's happening and what are these gifts that are available to us as a result of exploring the afterlife. Language also becomes important because it helps us to unwrap some of the experiences that we have in near-death experiences, shared death experiences, spiritually transformative experiences, or just, exploring the afterlife on our own. And that is what I generally call dream language. And it's the use of metaphor within the experience that helps us unwrap the wisdom that's contained there. I think the perfect example is when Father Nathan is talking about the turntable that was in the dream and how this person kept cycling and recycling the same loop over and over again to um, describe his experience. So it's all over the experiences that we work with in the world of near death and shared death experiences. And so when you are doing some of that same work for yourself, take a moment to jot down all the details of, say, a dream. And then as you have time to reflect on that, what might these metaphors show you, show us, and show our culture as a whole? Thank you for joining us at the Afterlife Files. We'll see you on the next interview. Bye now.